Hey guys, welcome back to my hypertrophy lifting series where I record as much of my entire workout as I possibly can. This is week 5, day 6 of my MyoMax training program. If you guys want the document for yourself, you can get it down in the description down below for $10. But honestly, full disclosure, you do not need it whatsoever because I record everything and upload it to YouTube. And if for whatever reason I forget to record something or I can't record it, then I fill you guys in on what I'm going to be doing to finishing the workout. Today is an accessory day and it's actually the end of week 5 and it's going to be pretty much just arms and shoulders, just like it sounds. We're starting off with the dumbbell seated shoulder press, and I really like this movement because you are so stable and locked into place, so you can just focus on using your shoulders. And you have like since it's only one dumbbell on each arm, you can actually really focus on exactly how your body wants to move in the given lift. If you were using like a barbell or a machine, you'd be more tied to exactly how the barbell or machine wants you to lift. However, with dumbbells, since you can use both, it really just works more towards your individualized anatomy and biomechanics and how your body actually wants to move. So I think that's the benefit of this lift. I already did one set. I ended up getting like 8.5 repetitions at 70 pounds. And I'm gonna try and get that again. And I just went ahead and did one set because I drove here and left my camera in my trunk. So since it's really cold outside, it actually fogged up a bunch. I'm sure that you guys can still see that like glare or fog up on the camera. So I took it out and I've been kind of just letting it do its thing and hopefully it goes away because I know it doesn't look the best, but it is what it is, you know? So we're one set deep. Let's get to set number 2. We're doing 3 here in total. Okay, there's 9 that time, and I'll take it. You know, that's better than the first set, so I think that is fantastic, and the tempo and everything was about the same, so even better. I'm actually thinking about bringing back this seat a little bit, because when you have just the slightest decline from like the incline state, it actually allows you to be in a more comfortable position while pressing, which can be better for the shoulder. Just think about doing like behind the neck presses. Well, a lot of people tend to injure their shoulders by doing that just because it's so far back. You push the shoulders kind of at like an externally rotated position, which just puts more strain on there, and it can really mess you up unless you have very healthy shoulders and you work your way into the movement. Well, by bringing it back a little bit, it's bringing the dumbbells a little bit more forward, and then it's allowing a more natural and safe bar path, or dumbbell path in this case, for you to be able to press from. Okay, so this is one of those bicep exercises which I consider absolutely top tier, like A+, S+, whatever. And the main reason for that is because it enacts humeral extension, which is basically just your upper arm or your arm going behind your body. And whenever you can do that, it's gonna really tug on the bicep musculature and cause it into a great deep stretch in the lengthened position, which is ultimately what you really want, because it has been proven time and time again that the stretch position actually produces more growth when you can make it the hardest part of the lift, that is. And since when your arms are dangling down, you're in humeral extension, and ideally there is still tension there. And what you really want out of this movement is to make it so that the bottom portion is not only the most stretched, but you also don't lose complete tension at the bottom. So whatever you have to do in order to achieve that, you should. So for instance, if I'm like further of an incline up, maybe at like a 45 degree, when I have my arm all the way down here, there's not gonna be much tension just because that's the line of where gravity would be pulling. And then my arms are just stacked. My joints are just stacked like this. Versus when you go all the way back down here, then you're getting much more of a deeper stretch while also being tugged on by gravity. So it's constant tension. If you don't get the angle right, then there may not be constant tension, which kind of almost defeats the purpose. I mean, it's still a great exercise, but it's not gonna be as good. So the further the incline is down in terms of how far back your arm is actually stretched, the better. So I've seen people online go like all the way down to flat and do it, which would be ideal. But if you're anywhere like over 5'10" or something, then I'm assuming that your wing range or like your what do you call it? Wingspan is going to be far too great with dumbbells that you'll just hit the ground. So then you'd have to start stacking like plates or something and then put the bench on top. Too much work, in my opinion, just for one exercise, even though it would be a fantastic exercise. If your gym has something where it's easily accessible in that way, great, but mine does not. So I'm doing about a 30-degree incline, and that's best for me because then the dumbbells don't hit the bottom, as you can see. Okay. There's the first set down. If you guys have been following along, you know that I like to superset it with some sort of wrist curl. Since the dumbbells are right here, it's super easy. But I would recommend kind of like halving the amount of weight. I think that, your forearms, your extensors and flexors in your forearm are not as strong as your humeral skeletal muscles like the biceps, triceps, and brachialis, excuse me. So going down in weight is going to do you much more favors. And also these are muscles kind of like calves where they can handle a lot of volume and a lot of repetitions. So I think that going down in weight and just cranking out reps is probably a better route anyway. Sometimes you just got to play to a muscle's strengths. So, for smaller muscle groups like the deltoid heads or the calves, which include the soleus and the gastrocnemius, other than things like the forearms, which includes your flexors and extensors of your fingers, your digits, then actually doing higher reps for those movements, just because they're worked so much. Those muscles are worked to living hell. For instance, your calves, you walk around on them all day. Your forearms, you're constantly moving your fingers, you're constantly gripping objects. They're being used all day. And then your shoulders are being used all day as well because you're constantly moving your arm. Since they're used all the time, they can handle higher amounts of volumes just because they're conditioned to do so. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're implementing a training routine. Like, how often do you really push objects away from you in your daily life? That just kind of shows that your chest probably can't handle as much frequency and as high a volume as these other previously mentioned muscle groups. I want to make it very clear. I'm not trying to infer that enacting humeral extension is the only way to get a stretch on the bicep. It's just clear to me that that puts the bicep under a greater lengthened position and stretch. Even just going out here and just fully extending out your arm will put a minor stretch on the bicep. It's not going to be like, just try it. If you go back here, the stretch is more intense than if you're up here. But that doesn't mean that you should cut out all humeral flexion exercises out of your routine. They're still important, especially since I think that they're a better way to get a very complete and intense contraction or shortened position with the biceps. So they still have merit. They're definitely still important, and especially I especially think that it's important to include a little mixture of both. Rarely do you want to just do an exercise in a given way, like all the time. You know, a lot of the times you want a combination of both, just to make sure that you're really maximizing the growth of everything and getting that complete package and fully developed physique that you're probably after if you're getting into stuff like this and trying to do some hypertrophy training, you know. But, you know, I mean, there probably are some use cases where banning a certain exercise or a certain movement pattern is a good idea. For instance, I've heard some things regarding the seated calf raise versus the standing calf raise, and some new research has been put out there that kind of unveils how terrible the seated seated calf exercise really is. And the reason for that is just how the gastroc and the soleus actually insert upon their respective joints, or insert and originate upon their respective joints. And it really limits gastroc activation when you're doing a seated variation versus a standing one. And it was previously thought that by doing seated, since the gastroc is being used less, that it would shift the emphasis more to the soleus, and then you would get more soleus growth. Well, that has recently been debunked, and I'm still reserving final judgment until more studies follow, but it's been debunked, and it's been shown that standing calf raises, you get the same amount of soleus growth, but you also get a ton of gastroc growth, versus the seated variation, you get like no soleus or no gastroc whatsoever, and then you just get some soleus, but it's the same as the standing. So it's like, why would you not just exclusively do standing calf raises? Maybe just if you want to like bust it out on a rare day, but I'm starting to get the impression that it's not even worth it. And that just goes to show that, you know, I mean, there are use cases for where you may want to consider banning an entire movement or variation of a movement, that is, from your routine if your primary goal is just hypertrophy and hypertrophic effects. The skeletal muscle comprising a lot of the arm is the brachialis, and it's really underappreciated and undertrained. Everybody always just focuses on the biceps, and I mean, it makes sense just because you can see the biceps from the outside. You can't really see the brachialis because it's located deep to the bicep. So it's kind of like on the upper arm and then located underneath the biceps. So it's kind of hidden from view, but as you hypertrophy that muscle, it actually shifts the biceps out a bit, and then it'll make the illusion of a larger arm when your biceps may not be. I mean, I guess it's not an illusion. It actually is fact, because the brachialis is a part of the arm, but it'll just like beefing it up overall. And It's primarily trained through hammer curls. And if you don't know what that is, it's just a neutral grip curl. So you're just going like this versus a bicep has supination. So you're supinated and your palms are facing your head kinda while you're doing it. And the reason why a hammer curl with a neutral grip position works the brachialis to a larger degree is just because when you are supinated, it's giving the biceps more of an emphasis. So when you take away that supination, and by the way, supination is one of the primary functions of the biceps. So when you're supinated like this, it's really enacting bicep leverage. But when you change it up and make it into the hammer curl variation, it will just shift the emphasis from the biceps and then gives the brachialis a better leverage to enact and actually use its full potential. So that's why I include hammer curls at the end of most of my bicep curls, just to squeeze out, once my biceps are kind of like finished off, then I can squeeze out a few more reps in the hammer curl position because they're not as demolished. And I just think that if you don't want to just focus on more brachialis, or you don't just want to focus more on biceps, then doing your curl supinated and then swapping to a neutral grip at the very end, I think is the best of both worlds. So you can really get the full package of bicep and brachialis development. Now, of course, if you want the real full package of the upper arm, you're gonna wanna be doing some sort of elbow extension exercise because the triceps work elbow extension, and actually above the head is superior just based off of how the biceps originates and inserts. I mean the triceps, sorry. Let's get into the last set here, then we can move on to some cable work. While I was doing that set, I was just thinking about something that I was reminding myself of. That's that you don't have to rush through your sets. And I've talked about this to death. I almost sound like a broken record, but what I mean by it, with a little spin this time that I'm giving this whole talk, is, you know, like, of course, like, you tend to rush through it a little bit when things get hard. But even if you're not rushing, sometimes just stopping for a brief second just to catch your breath or to kind of decompress for a sec before you get into the next rep can do heaps of good, to be honest. Because if you just take a second, because that's what I did at the very end here when I was doing the hammer curls, I kind of stopped for a sec between each rep just to like really get ready for the next repetition, and it ended up helping me a lot. I felt like my form was better. I could key more into the brachialis, and like definitely my form was better. If you look at the previous two sets, I was kind of and even then, like, I wasn't getting full elbow flexion out of it, you know? I wasn't getting that full flexion, so I was just kind of like getting to here and stopping, or maybe a little bit higher, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. I think that, and especially on something like deadlifts or squats, sometimes it's helpful to kind of stop at the top of a deadlift or at the bottom. And with squats, it's sometimes helpful to just take a breath at the top before you get into the next set. And, you know, some people may say, oh, it's like decreasing the time under tension, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it is decreasing the time under tension, but if it comes between maximizing that time under tension or getting another full, complete rep with good, solid form instead of one that's half-assed and janky, I would take that full repetition any day of the week, any day, anytime, over just forcing some half-baked reps just to try and maximize that time under tension. I think it's more important. Along the same line, sometimes taking a few seconds before you get into your superset can be good too, just to let your breath and your pretty much just your cardiovascular system catch up. If you're just jumping from one thing to another and not letting yourself fully recover, it's going to eat into the quality of that set. I mean, you may be getting a full 5 repetitions less than you could if you just waited like 30 seconds more or something. In terms of time spent in the gym versus reward, you'd be maximizing it, or at least really amping it up by taking a little bit of a breather. Kind of taking my own advice right here. I especially find that it's true when you're doing wrist curls and you're flipping around and doing it the other way. Since you're using the same sort of muscle groups, you can really gas yourself out with the curls before you flip around, and then that's eating into that second set. Okay, along some of the same lines that I was discussing earlier in today's session, I'm going to be supersetting the cable side lateral raise, which is really just going to key into this portion, the lateral head of the 3 deltoid heads. We have the anterior, the posterior, then the lateral right here. And it's not rocket science. Wherever you are enacting shoulder flexion in whichever plane, say you're doing it laterally like this, or frontal like this, or behind like this, whichever one you're doing, it's going to be using that portion of the deltoid. So by doing it laterally like this, I'm going to be focused on this lateral deltoid. If I were to raise in front, I'd be getting the frontal. And then if I go behind, or if I just pull it back like that, then it'll be getting the rear. And I really like having some targeted work for the side and posterior, but mainly the side deltoid, because when you're doing rows, you're hitting the back, the back portion. When you're doing presses, you're hitting the front portion. But when you're really hitting the side portion, you're hitting them with like some more vertical pressing movements, or some upright rows, or maybe some shrugs sometimes, maybe. However, it doesn't get a lot of direct work. It doesn't even get a lot of secondary work. And that's why I find that including a fly is of the utmost importance, and ideally frequently, because like I said earlier, it's one of those muscles that you use it a lot in your daily life, and therefore it can take a beating. And the reason why you guys see me doing cables so often instead of any other form of raises is because I like how much tension there is when you're using cables. The cables are constantly pulling. There's never a moment where you're not activating your lateral deltoid while you're doing the raises. You know, up here, you have the constant line of pull. Down here, you have the constant line of pull. Versus if you were to substitute with something like dumbbells, up here would be great, but as you were going down to here, there's the deltoids are not being worked whatsoever, because the only thing that's being worked are your forearms just to grip the dumbbell. There's no more line of pull with gravity against the weight. It's just non-existent, except for the forearms, of course. And then, you know, machines are a great option too. However, machines are much more fixed, so you don't really get the full complexity of how the shoulder joint wants to move. Now, I'm not saying don't use either of these options. I think that you should probably be using all three, and especially because if you just use one until the end of time, your body isn't going to really recognize it as a suitable reason for hypertrophy. You know, so you got to be rotating them out. So, you know, after this program, I'm going to be subbing it out for a different variation. You know, I mean, and you don't have to fully scrap cables. You do behind the back. You could do bilateral. You could lean more. You know, it's whatever you want to do. But there are benefits. There's pros and cons to each. Ah, man, I know my form wasn't like pitch perfect there or anything. You know, a lot of people, they love to like diss the burn and diss the pump as a byproduct, saying, oh, it doesn't like promote muscle growth, it does nothing for hypertrophy, blah, blah, blah. And while I can't argue with any scientific studies, I will say that I believe the pump and the burn to be a good indicator that you're doing something right. So for instance, if you're doing like a lateral raise like I just did, and you don't feel a burn or get a pump, then I think that that's a real good indicator that your form is way off. You know, you're probably using too much trap or using too much momentum to get it up or something along those lines. And you may want to reevaluate how you're doing the exercise. So in that regard, I think that a pump and a burn is extremely valuable. Now, I can't speak to whether it's absolutely, whether it has any merit in actually building or enlarging your pre-existing muscle tissue. I can't tell you anything about that. But I have a feeling that it's got to be doing something, you know? And at the very least, I mean, what is a pump? It's just extra blood flow to the tissue, you know? And whenever there's extra blood flow, you know that there's something happening. Whenever I'm shooting for failure, I always like to try and crank out a rep beyond that failure point, just to ensure that I've hit the mark. And sometimes I think that I'm pretty much at failure, but I'm not. And that's the worst, when you just swear like, oh, I had like a great workout. It was bananas. I went balls to the wall in every single set. And then over time, you end up not achieving any growth out of it. That's why I like to be sure that I'm hitting failure and then some. And sometimes, I intentionally don't go to failure when my body's feeling pretty beat up. But that's the beautiful thing about listening to your body, Whew.
Recording in 45 minutes. Recording in 45.
Woo. Up next, I'm doing some bilateral cable curls, superset with some standing unilateral extensions. So these ones. And I'm doing a little bit of a form change here. Previously, I would do cable curls where I'm pretty close to the cable rack, the cable machine, and then I'm just curling upright like this, almost. So it's pretty much mimicking just a easy bar, just standing bicep curl. I'm deciding to do something different here because honestly, what's the benefit of the cables? The cable's benefit is to provide constant tension. And when you're doing it standing here, once you hit the bottom, you're not getting as much tension anymore on the biceps, and instead you're just hanging on. Of course, there still is some tension applied, but it's not in any sort of meaningful way to the biceps. Versus if I stand back, and then this is where it's tugging from, and then I'm up here doing it, then it's gonna be pulling on the biceps like crazy and enacting a wicked stretch. So that's what I'm gonna do this time. Standing back, it can actually be a little lower, because if you put it lower and then do it, see, now I'm feeling a wicked stretch even in this more relaxed type of position. Yeah, you can definitely feel that provided a lot more tension and honestly time under tension, as in like my biceps were constantly being worked, so they didn't receive a break at any point in the range of motion for that exercise. And I think that that's fantastic. Of course, I lowered the weight like crazy. I was doing pretty much double this when I was doing it in the old way. But whenever you change up a movement pattern substantially like that, like you got to kind of work from the foundation. You got to build your foundation first, in other words. I tend to hang out more in the lengthened position, aka the bottom portion of this range of motion, because it has been shown that a stretch produces more growth, and that is the stretch. To the lengthened position, it's pretty much always the stretch position in a given exercise. So, you know, at the top is the triceps are the most shortened, and you're not getting as much stimulus for growth, that is, for hypertrophy. If your goal isn't hypertrophy, do whatever the hell you want. But if it is hypertrophy, then you may want to stay a little bit more in that lengthened position. Of course, the contracted position, or the shortened position, that is still very important. Don't get me wrong. Every portion of a range of motion is important. However, hypertrophy plays some favorites. It likes the lengthened or stretched position more. So I think that you should just spend a little bit more time in that portion. And it's not to say that you should disregard the others. Just a little bit of food for thought. Whew. I kind of messed myself up there. There's a little form hack if you didn't know it. By extending your wrists out like this, you're taking the forearms largely out of the movement, and then it shifts even more emphasis onto the biceps. So if you're like this, and then you try and curl, you'll feel that your mind-muscle connection, everything is so heightened beyond belief, but your strength totally goes down the toilet because you're removing some of that stability and effectively a whole muscle group from the exercise. So do with that what you will as well. I think that if your biceps are lagging or something, then that could be a very, very key tool for you. Key little form tidbit. But for me, that was just foolish. I don't know why I did that. I think that the weight was feeling a little light, so I wanted to try it, but it just kind of threw me off in the end. I honestly prefer the unilateral variation of this exercise because with bilateral, I tend to not get as deep of a stretch. I feel like my elbows kind of start to go forward. Just not ideal. Ooh. Ooh. Sorry about that scream. I was just losing my grip on that. Kind of whack. Anyways, guys, this is gonna be it for MyoMax. Yeah, I said that right. This is actually going to be the last day that I do of MyoMax. And I got a few reasons for that. Firstly, I want to mix it up for you guys as the viewer. I think that me filming in the same location every day gets a little monotonous, gets a little boring. I want to change the scenery for you guys. Also for myself though, to be honest, I get a little sick of doing the same exact exercises in very similar ways week to week. And yes, I know that I could change it up at any time if I wanted to and like rewrite the document and stuff. But honestly, I feel like I've gotten what I wanted to out of this program. It's been fantastic so far. I've made a ton of gains. I'm up like 10 or 15 pounds. I have continuously pushed the limits and added weight to my exercises, added sets, progressively overloaded. In a nutshell, everything from week to week. It's been fantastic. But I am getting a little bit burnt out, not only physically, because the volume keeps increasing, which, you know, obviously like I can handle it, but I think the videos are becoming too long for you guys to really enjoy, and it's not much of a difference besides just an increase in volume. And I'd like to kind of compact my content a little bit more, make it a little bit more succinct, make it have less fillers and whatnot, and make it more like goal oriented. Like I want to have an overall topic with subtopics contained within that, and then I want to do more intuitive programming towards my body, and so that every workout is at least slightly different, so that it's not only interesting for you guys but keeps everything fun for me as well. So anyway, if you guys can still totally purchase MyoMax. I'm going to keep it on my shop at least for a while, you know, and I'll probably even turn it into like something like Lifting Journey or something, and then you guys can just buy that for $10 and get everything MyoMax and whatever else I end up releasing in the future. You can totally still download it, follow these videos if you want, or just use the document and run it for the full 9 weeks like I originally intended. I really hope I'm not letting you guys down by ending the program early, but I do really think that I have some valid reasons for doing so. And believe me, this is not a cop-out in order to make my workouts easier or with less volume. I intend to deliver even more intensity, probably a little bit less volume per session basis, but overall the same amount, and just have more variety, more fun in the gym. That's really what I'm after. Once something stops being fun for me and I stop enjoying it, and honestly, it's not hard for me to enjoy lifting. It's one of my true passions in life. But once it becomes boring or non-interesting to me, I think it's time to change up. So anyway, that's just letting you guys know where I'm at. It'll either be tomorrow or in like a few days when I start my next segment of my lifting journey. It's probably going to just be some like general bulking phase where I do it as I go along and you know, but it's going to be an upgrade. Trust me. I have big plans and I'm very excited to enact them. But anyway, if you want to finish today, because I still have a couple more exercises. I got 3 sets of the standing calf raise machine and 3 sets of the like seated calf raise machine, but it's not like the plate loaded one. It's one where your legs are straight, your knees are straight, and then there's just a bend at your hips. So that one. So we'll do 3 sets of each of those. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. This is my conclusion to MyoMax week 5, day 6. And honestly, my conclusion to MyoMax as a whole. It's been a wonderful experience. To those of you that have been truly watching and following me along this journey, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I hope that you continue to follow me along through the next journey that I embark on. Goodbye. Have a good night.